He's
The
the
air in
one! He
what was
stole my
once the
necklace!
opulent office of Elysium
Get
hung
me
heavy with
necklace!
the scent of stale
Ma'am, I
despair,
didn't take
a
anything.
stark
You've got the
contrast
wrong
to the
person.
custom-blended, exclusive fragrances that once defined its luxury. Vlad Kostin sat slumped behind a vast, empty mahogany desk, his tailored suit now rumpled, a thin sheen of sweat on his brow. The glow of a dozen monitors cast a sickly pallor on his face, each screen a brutal mirror reflecting his downfall. News chirons scrolled relentlessly. Elysium Boutique declared bankrupt, Kostin under federal investigation, allegations of systemic discrimination rock luxury retail. Beside them, digital images of his once gleaming store, now plastered with for lease signs and official seizure notices, flickered like mocking ghosts. A pile of legal documents, each bearing the grim insignia of closure and litigation, lay scattered before him, a testament to a world dissolving. He picked up a framed photograph from the desk, a relic of a grand opening, his own younger, arrogant face beaming beside a champagne flute. He threw it down with a choked cry, the glass shattering against the polished wood. Employees, once bowing to his every whim, were seen on grainy video footage streaming out of the store, their faces etched with relief, not regret. The diamonds, the watches, the designer garments that had filled his showcases were gone, liquidated in desperate, ignominious sales. His empire, built on exclusivity and an unspoken hierarchy, had not merely crumbled, it had been meticulously dismantled, brick by gilded brick. The silence in the sprawling office, once filled with the hushed reverence of luxury sales and his own booming self-importance, was now deafening. He was alone, utterly and irrevocably alone, consumed by the wreckage of his own making. 3 months earlier. The soft, amber glow of Elysium shimmered with an almost ethereal quality, catching the polished surfaces of antique vitrines and illuminating the facets of a $1 million diamond necklace. It was a cathedral of curated desire, where hushed whispers replaced shouts, and every gesture, every interaction, was a performance of refined commerce. Among the perfectly coiffed sales associates gliding across the marble floors, Marcus moved with an understated elegance that belied his true purpose. His charcoal suit, impeccably tailored, whispered competence. His dark skin, a rich contrast against the pristine white shirts and silk ties favored by the establishment, was meticulously maintained, his bearing one of effortless grace. He wasn't just a salesman, he was an artist of horology, effortlessly articulating the intricate mechanics of a rare Patek Philippe with a passion that captivated even the most jaded clientele. His knowledge wasn't rote, it was deeply ingrained, born from genuine intellectual curiosity and rigorous study. He could discern the subtle nuances of a movement from across the room, anticipating a client's unspoken desires before they fully formed. This wasn't merely a job for Marcus, it was a stage where he played a role with precision, every interaction a brushstroke in a larger, meticulously planned operation. His eyes, though perpetually calm and courteous, held a keen, almost imperceptible spark of observation, missing nothing. He was, to all outward appearances, the embodiment of Elysium's elite service, a perfect cog in a well-oiled machine. Yet, beneath the polished exterior of the boutique, a different current flowed, emanating directly from its owner, Vlad Kostin. Vlad was a man sculpted by inherited wealth and an unshakable belief in his own superiority. He was impeccably dressed, always, his silver hair swept back with an air of practiced nonchalance, a glint of self-satisfaction in his pale blue eyes. He moved through his domain like a benevolent monarch, dispensing small, cutting remarks disguised as paternalistic advice. "Marcus, dear boy," he'd purr, a hand resting briefly on the younger man's shoulder, "you have a certain, raw talent. But remember, in Elysium, we sell an experience, not just timepieces. It's about pedigree, isn't it? Something one either has, or one cultivates." The underlying implication, unspoken but acutely felt, was a constant, subtle jab at Marcus's background, his very presence a seeming anomaly in Vlad's carefully constructed world. Vlad's tone was rarely overtly aggressive, but his words carried the sharp edge of passive aggression, a constant, low-frequency hum of superiority that sought to subtly diminish those he deemed beneath him. He cultivated an atmosphere where outward professionalism was paramount, but beneath the surface, a hierarchy of unspoken prejudices thrived. He'd make jokes about a new security system, implying certain elements needed closer watching, his gaze lingering fractionally too long on Marcus. He'd praise a white colleague for a sale, then turn to Marcus and remark, "You see, Marcus. That's the effort I'm talking about. A certain, natural ease with our clientele. It was a world where competence was acknowledged but never truly celebrated if it didn't fit the predetermined mold, a constant, subtle psychological pressure designed to remind certain individuals of their place. The air in Elysium, for all its luxurious perfumes, sometimes carried the faint, acrid tang of unspoken bias. The subtle barbs Vlad cast were a constant, insidious undercurrent to the polished surface of Elysium. They were never direct accusations, never outright insults, but rather a sophisticated form of psychological attrition. One morning, as Marcus meticulously arranged a display of vintage watches, Vlad approached, a faint, patronizing smile playing on his lips. "Marcus, excellent work, as always. Though I must say," he paused, scrutinizing a rare brigade with an exaggerated tilt of his head, "you do have a peculiar knack for these mechanical trinkets. Quite an unexpected passion, given, well, your background, wouldn't you say? One rarely sees such dedication outside of, shall we say, more established circles." He chuckled, a low, dry sound, before moving on, leaving the unspoken implications hanging in the air like a faint, unpleasant odor. Another time, during a staff meeting, Vlad was discussing brand identity. He gestured expansively. "Our clientele, they expect a certain refinement. An understanding of inherited taste, a sensitivity to the nuances of old money. It's not just about selling, it's about belonging. Some pick it up naturally, others, well, they have to work harder at it, to shed certain rough edges." His eyes, almost imperceptibly, flickered towards Marcus, a silent, cutting remark disguised as a general observation. Marcus, seated at the table, met his gaze with an unreadable composure, his pen poised over a notebook filled with seemingly innocuous notes. Each microaggression, each carefully worded slight, was met by Marcus with an unwavering facade of professionalism. His responses were always courteous, his demeanor unruffled. Internally, however, a different process was at play. Every interaction, every veiled comment, every patronizing glance was meticulously logged. His bespoke wristwatch, a seemingly ordinary timepiece, contained a discreet, high-fidelity audio recorder. His smartphone, often held casually as he moved through the store, was configured to capture video discreetly, its lens almost imperceptible within its elegant casing. In the quiet solitude of his apartment late at night, Marcus would meticulously review the day's recordings. He transcribed verbatim Vlad's most egregious remarks, cross-referencing them with the time and date of the incident, noting any witnesses present. He categorized them, implied racial inferiority, questioning professional competence based on background, subtle social exclusion. Each entry was a brick in an edifice of evidence, building a formidable case. He maintained constant, encrypted communication with his handler, a seasoned federal agent named Elena Petrova. "Another one today, Elena," he'd report in a low, precise voice, the phone held close to his ear. Implied I lacked the pedigree for this environment. Suggested I'd have to work harder to shed rough edges. Audio attached. Elena, on the other end, would offer clinical feedback, reinforcing protocols, reminding him to stay detached, to focus on the objective. "Good work, Marcus. Keep building the file. We need an undeniable pattern, not just isolated incidents." The systemic nature of the problem extended beyond Vlad's personal animosity. Marcus observed how clients of color, despite displaying clear affluence, were sometimes subtly steered towards less exclusive sections of the store, or received a slightly less effusive welcome. Conversely, wealthy white patrons, even those with questionable manners, were treated with deferential awe. The store's hiring practices, too, seemed to favor a homogeneous demographic, with the exception of token positions filled by individuals like Marcus, carefully chosen to project an image of diversity without genuinely embracing it. Marcus saw it all, silently absorbing the injustices, cataloging the invisible barriers, his resolve hardening with each passing day. He was not just an employee, he was a surgeon, methodically preparing to excise a cancerous growth from the heart of a prejudiced system. The air in Elysium that afternoon was particularly charged. A prestigious collection of rare Bulgari pieces had just arrived, and Vlad, radiating an almost feverish pride, was hosting an exclusive viewing for a select group of high-net-worth clients, the kind whose annual expenditure at the boutique could single-handedly keep a smaller business afloat. Marcus, as the resident expert, was demonstrating the intricate mechanism of a Serpenti Misteriosi, his voice a smooth, articulate baritone as he explained its history and craftsmanship. He was in his element, holding the rapt attention of a prospective buyer, a discerning art collector known for her meticulous taste. Vlad, however, was circling. His smile, usually fixed and insincere, was tighter than usual. He had been stewing for days over a minor, inconsequential error in a sales report that Marcus had submitted, a decimal point misplaced, quickly corrected, but in Vlad's mind, an unforgivable lapse by someone he already viewed as an outsider. To him, it wasn't just an error, it was proof of Marcus's inherent unsuitability, a chink in the armor of his perceived perfection. He saw this public event as his perfect opportunity to finally put him in his place, to reassert the pecking order in front of witnesses who mattered. As Marcus concluded his explanation, receiving a nod of approval from the art collector, Vlad strode forward, his voice cutting through the polite murmur of conversation. "Marcus, a moment, if you please." His tone, while still outwardly polite, carried an unmistakable edge. The conversations in the room subtly hushed. "While your enthusiasm for these pieces is commendable, I've noticed a consistent lack of alignment with Elysium's exacting standards." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled clients, a performative sigh escaping his lips. "That sales report, for instance. Such basic errors betray a certain inattention to detail. A lack of the inherent meticulousness we require." The art collector raised an eyebrow, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Marcus remained utterly still, his expression a carefully constructed mask of polite inquiry. Vlad pressed on, emboldened by the silent attention. "Let's be frank, Marcus. Elysium is not just about selling luxury, it's about embodying it. About understanding our clientele on a fundamental, almost genetic level." And frankly, his voice dropped, laced with a sneering condescension that cut deeper than any shout, "while you may have some raw ability, you simply lack the finesse. The innate understanding of our world. You don't quite fit the brand, do you?" He delivered the final words with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if swatting away an annoying fly. A collective gasp, quickly suppressed, rippled through the room. The art collector looked aghast. But Vlad, basking in what he perceived as his unassailable authority, continued, his voice rising, "I believe, Marcus, it's time we acknowledge that Elysium is simply not the right environment for you. Effective immediately, your services are no longer required." He smiled thinly, a triumphant glint in his eyes, confident that he had just delivered a decisive blow, publicly shaming an employee he saw as an affront to his sensibilities. He had drawn a line, declaring his untouchable status. Marcus, however, didn't flinch. His gaze, calm and steady, met Vlad's for a long, silent moment. There was no anger, no humiliation visible in his eyes, only a chilling, almost unsettling, lack of emotion. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Understood, Mr. Costin." His voice was low, devoid of inflection. He placed the Bulgari watch back into its velvet tray with meticulous care, then turned, walking calmly towards the staff lockers. The room remained silent as Marcus collected his few personal items, a small, leather-bound notebook, a spare pen. He didn't rush, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. As he reached the main entrance of Elysium, stepping out from under the amber glow into the harsh, indifferent light of the street, he paused. He pulled out his discreetly modified phone. His thumb moved with practiced ease, navigating to a secure, encrypted application. He pressed the call button. The connection was instantaneous. "Mission accomplished," Marcus said into the receiver, his voice clear and resonant, completely devoid of the deferential tone he had employed for months. They crossed the line. "Activating protocol Phoenix. He clicked off the call, the screen going dark. The light that had once filled his eyes with quiet observation now gleamed with a cold, unwavering determination. The game had changed. Vlad Costin reveled in the aftermath of Marcus's dismissal. The incident, far from causing him any unease, had only reinforced his self-perception of absolute authority. He held court in his office, sipping an aged single malt, recounting the public firing to his two most sycophantic managers, Tatiana and Sergei. The nerve, honestly, he'd sneer, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Trying to blend in, thinking his pedigree could ever truly match the exquisite standards of Elysium. A temporary aberration, quickly corrected. He puffed out his chest, convinced he had purged an undesirable element, re-established order, and cemented his unshakable power. He even boasted about it at his exclusive golf club that weekend, framing it as a necessary act of decisive leadership. "One must maintain the brand, you understand. Uphold the image. His associates nodded knowingly, for in their world, such assertions of power were admired, not questioned. A few days later, a subtle shift occurred in the meticulously ordered universe of Elysium. A team of individuals arrived, impeccably dressed and carrying official-looking briefcases. They introduced themselves as auditors from a national luxury retail association, here for a routine compliance review. Their presence, initially, seemed innocuous enough. They requested access to sales figures, inventory logs, and employee records, standard procedure, or so Vlad was led to believe. He greeted them with his customary condescending charm, offering them the finest coffee and a fleeting tour, convinced they would find nothing amiss in his perfectly curated kingdom. He even saw it as another opportunity to showcase his undisputed success. However, a faint unease began to ripple through some of the staff. The auditors weren't just looking at numbers, they were asking probing questions. Questions about staff turnover, about specific customer interactions, about the internal grievance procedures. They spoke in measured tones, their eyes sharp and observant, missing nothing. Tatiana, usually unflappable, caught one of them meticulously examining CCTV footage of the employee entrance, seemingly tracking specific individuals. Sergei, reviewing the list of requested documents, noted the unusually detailed demands for personnel files, particularly those of recently departed staff. Vlad, engrossed in sourcing a new collection of emeralds and planning an extravagant marketing campaign, largely dismissed these subtle tremors. He was too confident, too self-absorbed to perceive the encroaching shadow. He saw the auditors as a minor inconvenience, easily placated with a show of transparency and a few carefully doctored reports. Then came the morning of the weekly management meeting. Vlad sat at the head of the gleaming conference table, pontificating on quarterly targets, his voice ringing with his usual self-assurance. The auditors, now familiar faces, were also present, sitting quietly at the far end. Just as Vlad was launching into a tirade about optimizing customer engagement, the double doors to the conference room swung open. A figure stepped in. He was dressed not in the customary suit of Elysium staff or the discreet attire of the auditors, but in the sharp, authoritative uniform of a federal agent. His posture was commanding, his expression unyielding. It was Marcus. Vlad's words died in his throat. His face, usually a mask of control, contorted into a grotesque mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. He scrambled to his feet, knocking his chair over with a clatter. "You. What is the meaning of this?" "Security," he stammered, his voice laced with a sudden, uncharacteristic tremor. Marcus, however, ignored Vlad's outburst. He walked deliberately to the center of the room, his eyes scanning the faces of the stunned managers, finally settling on Vlad. "Mr. Costin," he began, his voice clear, calm, and utterly devoid of any subservience. "I am Special Agent Marcus Thorne, head of the Federal Anti-Discrimination Services Special Investigations Unit. These," he gestured to the auditors, who now revealed their badges, "are my team." The room was plunged into a shocked silence. Marcus continued, his words precise and chillingly authoritative. "Your boutique, Elysium, is officially under federal investigation for systemic discrimination, violations of federal employment law, and obstruction of justice. The Phoenix Protocol has been fully activated. Consider this your formal notice, Mr. Costin. Your reign of unchecked authority ends now." Vlad swayed, gripping the edge of the table, his bravado utterly shattered. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of white. His elite world, once so impregnable, had just been breached, not by a storm, but by a ghost he thought he had banished. The shadow had arrived, and it wore the face of the men he had so contemptuously dismissed. The abrupt revelation of Marcus's true identity and the federal investigation sent shockwaves through Elysium. The carefully constructed facade of luxury and exclusivity shattered, revealing the fragile anxieties of its inhabitants. Vlad Costin, reeling from the initial blow, quickly tried to regain his composure, his mind racing to understand the extent of the damage. He barked orders at Tatiana and Sergei, instructing them to retrieve specific, clean files and to ensure employees understood the gravity of the situation, a thinly veiled threat to coerce silence. His initial shock was rapidly giving way to a desperate, furious resolve to control the narrative. But Marcus was several steps ahead. While Vlad was still attempting to formulate a strategy of denial and deflection, the federal agents moved with surgical precision. The auditors, now openly identified as special agents, fanned out across the boutique. They didn't just ask for documents, they demanded specific, authenticated records, payroll archives, HR complaints, employee termination reports, CCTV footage logs dating back years. Their questions during initial interviews were pointed, bypassing the superficial and immediately targeting potential inconsistencies and long-ignored grievances. Agent Ramirez, a stern-faced woman with an uncanny ability to read micro-expressions, sat down with a sales associate who had witnessed Marcus's public humiliation. Her questions were gentle but persistent, slowly chipping away at the employee's fear of reprisal. Were there other incidents, similar to what happened to Mr. Thorne? She asked, her voice calm. Have you ever felt discriminated against, or seen others treated unfairly because of their background? The employee, initially hesitant, eventually started to speak, revealing a pattern of subtle sidelining and dismissed promotions based on ethnicity. Meanwhile, Agent Chen, a tech specialist, systematically extracted data from the boutique's server, bypassing Vlad's attempts to restrict access. He quickly discovered multiple instances of deleted emails and altered digital records concerning employee complaints. The CCTV footage, which Vlad assumed he controlled, was meticulously reviewed by another agent, cross-referencing timestamps with Marcus's hidden recordings. What Vlad had seen as a minor inconvenience, the agent saw as a goldmine of evidence. Vlad, holed up in his now compromised office, made frantic calls to his lawyer, a slick, well-connected individual named Mr. Davies. "They're trying to ruin me, Davies." Vlad fumed into the phone. "This is preposterous. Baseless accusations from a disgruntled former employee." Mr. Davies, however, sounded less confident. "Mr. Costin, they seem very prepared. They're not just looking at the recent incident. They're going deep. Have you been entirely transparent about your past HR practices?" Vlad hedged, mumbling about necessary business decisions and uncooperative staff. As the days turned into a week, the skeletons in the closet began to tumble out. Agents uncovered a paper trail of unfair dismissals. A young, talented female manager passed over for promotion in favor of a less experienced male colleague who was a personal friend of Vlad's. An elderly, long-serving porter fired ostensibly for poor performance, but clearly targeted to cut pension costs, replaced by a much younger, cheaper hire. These incidents, previously dismissed as isolated managerial decisions, now formed a chilling pattern under the federal microscope. Even more damning were the whispers from the staff, who, emboldened by the federal presence and Marcus's undeniable authority, slowly began to shed their fear. Junior employees shared stories of Vlad's demeaning performance reviews, where he would critique their tone, accent, or lack of polish, clearly coded language for discriminatory bias. Several employees recounted being told not to be so outwardly ethnic when interacting with certain high-profile clients. These were not just isolated grievances, they were threads in a vast, carefully woven web of lies and systemic abuse that had defined Elysium for years, all designed to maintain Vlad's self-serving vision of an exclusive, homogeneous world. The air of luxury that once permeated the boutique was replaced by the cold, metallic scent of impending justice. The initial shock among Elysium staff slowly transformed into a fragile hope, nurtured by the relentless, methodical approach of Marcus and his team. What had begun as an investigation into a single egregious act of discrimination quickly expanded into a forensic deep dive into the boutique's entire operational history. The agents weren't just looking for recent transgressions, they were meticulously sifting through years of records, piecing together a comprehensive tapestry of abuse. Agent Ramirez, following a hunch, tracked down a former sales associate, a brilliant young woman of Latina descent named Sophia, who had been abruptly fired 2 years prior. Sophia had been lauded for her sales figures but constantly undermined by Vlad's subtle, demeaning comments about her fiery temperament or unconventional presentation. She recounted how she had tried to lodge a formal complaint but was met with veiled threats to her future career and an intimidating non-disclosure agreement. Now, with the federal shield, Sophia's fear gave way to a simmering indignation. Her detailed testimony, supported by her own saved emails and performance reviews, painted a grim picture of Vlad's manipulative tactics. Similarly, Agent Chen uncovered a trove of emails between Vlad and a local councilman, Mr. Harrison, concerning expedited permits and discreet handling of building code violations. These emails hinted at a deeper, more insidious relationship where favors were exchanged for a blind eye turned to Vlad's internal practices. One particularly damning exchange discussed minimizing any potential public relations issues after a customer of color had publicly complained about being refused service, a complaint that had mysteriously vanished from local records. The agents systematically interviewed dozens of former employees, many of whom had been too terrified to speak out before. There was Thomas, a meticulous black craftsman responsible for custom jewelry repairs, who was consistently paid less than his white counterparts with similar experience, despite being repeatedly praised for his skill. There was Maria, a quiet, dedicated cleaner who endured years of Vlad's patronizing remarks about her accent and was denied basic benefits. Their stories, once isolated whispers in the wind, now converged, amplified by the federal inquiry. Each testimony resonated with a chilling familiarity, reflecting the patterns Marcus had himself documented. The hidden recordings Marcus had meticulously collected became the linchpin. A recording of Vlad laughing dismissively with Sergei about diversity quotas while reviewing resumes. Another, capturing Vlad's snide comments about a wealthy Middle Eastern client's new money, instructing staff to prioritize established clientele. These audio files, coupled with the testimonies, were undeniable, painting Vlad not just as an arrogant businessman, but as a systemic perpetrator of prejudice. It quickly became apparent that Vlad's immunity wasn't just a product of his own arrogance, it was actively fostered by a network of local cronies. Mr. Harrison, the councilman, was just one piece of the puzzle. Other prominent local business owners, to whom Vlad offered exclusive discounts and private events, had actively used their influence to quash any local complaints against Elysium. They were part of an unwritten agreement, mutual protection within their elite bubble. Any threat to Vlad was, by extension, a threat to their own comfortable, untouchable status. The investigation wasn't merely uncovering individual acts of discrimination, it was exposing the entire corrupt substratum that allowed Vlad to operate with such impunity. The higher system, activated by Marcus, was now shining an uncomfortable spotlight not just on Vlad Kostin, but on the entire local ecosystem of power that had shielded him for so long. The walls of their comfortable, self-serving world were beginning to crack, revealing the rot beneath. As the federal investigation at Elysium deepened, the tremors it created began to ripple far beyond the boutique's gilded doors. Vlad's initial panic morphed into a desperate fury, and he activated his own network, a web of influence spun over decades of backroom deals and shared secrets. The auditors he once dismissed now threatened to unravel not just his business, but the very fabric of his protected existence. Local Councilman Harrison, his face now a mask of thinly veiled anxiety, was the first to act. He began making furious calls to his contacts in state politics, attempting to exert pressure on the federal agency. News articles, subtly biased and questioning the overreach of federal powers into local business matters, began appearing in regional papers, clearly an attempt to discredit Marcus and his team. Online, anonymous social media accounts spread rumors about Marcus being a disgruntled employee with a personal vendetta, hoping to tarnish his professional reputation. Vlad's influential business partners, accustomed to receiving preferential treatment and exclusive access through Elysium, suddenly felt the heat. They initiated their own campaigns of intimidation, subtly threatening witnesses who had given statements, or trying to bribe minor officials to find obscure technicalities that could stall the investigation. One morning, a cryptic and signed letter arrived at the federal field office, detailing fabricated allegations against Agent Petrova, Marcus's handler, implying corruption in her past cases. But Marcus and his team were not easily deterred. They were the embodiment of the higher system, a force designed to operate impartially, insulated from local politics and personal vendettas. Every attempt to discredit them, every smear campaign, every political phone call was met with a cold, professional countermeasure. The fabricated allegations against Agent Petrova were swiftly investigated and debunked, leading to an immediate, separate inquiry into who had initiated the false report. The local press, initially swayed, found their carefully crafted narratives crumbling under the weight of meticulously released, undeniable facts from the federal team. Marcus, maintaining his characteristic calm, oversaw the strategic release of information that confirmed the systematic nature of the discrimination, providing just enough detail to counter the public attacks without jeopardizing the ongoing investigation. He conducted a series of internal briefings, reminding his agents of the sanctity of their mission and the ironclad protocols designed to protect them from external influence. Their pressure is a sign of their weakness, not ours, he told them, his voice firm. It means we're hitting a nerve. Stay focused. Stay clean. The parallel investigation into Vlad's patrons, which had been initiated after Agent Chen's discovery of the incriminating emails, now gained significant momentum. The federal team wasn't just investigating Vlad, they were dissecting the entire ecosystem that had enabled him. Subpoenas were issued to local developers, lawyers, and even a prominent judge who had often socialized with Vlad. The once whispered connections were now being systematically exposed and documented, linking them directly to Vlad's ability to operate above the law for so long. Panic began to set in among Vlad's powerful circle. The casual alliances and unspoken pacts suddenly felt like nooses tightening around their own necks. Councilman Harrison, realizing the federal inquiry was now aimed squarely at him and his illicit dealings, attempted to distance himself from Vlad, publicly stating he had been misled. But it was too late. The invisible war, initially aimed at Vlad, was now engulfing his protectors, proving that the reach of the higher system truly knew no local bounds. The intricate, corrupt web they had woven was slowly, inexorably, beginning to unravel. The pressure on Vlad's network reached a breaking point. The federal investigation, relentless and unyielding, had systematically peeled back layers of deceit, exposing not just individual acts of discrimination but a deep-seated culture of impunity. Marcus, now operating with the full authority of the federal government, orchestrated the final phase of evidence collection, meticulously connecting every thread that led back to Vlad and his powerful, corrupt allies. Working tirelessly, Marcus and Agent Chen pieced together a comprehensive financial analysis. They uncovered a series of shell companies used by Vlad to funnel consulting fees to Councilman Harrison and other local figures. These payments, disguised as legitimate business expenses, were in fact kickbacks for turning a blind eye to Elysium's discriminatory hiring practices and numerous regulatory violations. Bank records, initially heavily redacted and difficult to trace, were meticulously reconstructed, revealing a clear pattern of illicit transactions. Further investigation into the HR department, now thoroughly compromised, yielded a damning trove of internal memos. One particularly egregious memo, signed by Vlad himself and distributed to his management team, outlined a preferred client profile that explicitly, albeit in coded language, excluded certain demographics. Another detailed a performance review template that included subjective, racially biased metrics, used to justify the dismissal or stagnation of employees like Sophia and Thomas. These documents, combined with the hidden audio recordings Marcus had made, created an undeniable record of institutionalized prejudice. Marcus personally conducted the final, most crucial interviews. He spoke with the art collector who had witnessed his public humiliation, securing her detailed, indignant testimony. He brought in former employees, their voices now steady with righteous anger, to recount specific instances of Vlad's demeaning behavior and the systemic barriers they faced. Each testimony, each piece of recovered document, each meticulously tracked financial transaction, added another immutable link to the chain of evidence. The weight of this irrefutable proof began to crush Vlad's patrons. Councilman Harrison, facing imminent arrest for corruption and obstruction, desperately tried to cut a deal, offering to testify against Vlad in exchange for a lighter sentence. His carefully cultivated public image was in tatters, replaced by a terrified, cornered politician. Other business associates, realizing the extent of the federal reach, swiftly issued public statements condemning Vlad's actions and expressing deep shock at the revelations, scrambling to distance themselves from the pariah he had become. Their carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbled, exposing their self-serving hypocrisy. The climax of this evidence gathering came with the unearthing of a secret ledger, kept by Vlad's notoriously loyal, now panicked accountant. The ledger detailed not only the illicit payments to local officials but also recorded a significant, legal defense fund that Vlad had been building for years, a slush fund explicitly designated to handle any potential discrimination lawsuits or investigations. This ledger, painstakingly authenticated, was the ultimate smoking gun, proving premeditation and a deliberate, systemic strategy of discrimination and cover-up. Marcus held the ledger in his hands, its pages a testament to years of unchecked arrogance and abuse. The quiet satisfaction in his eyes was not born of vengeance, but of a profound sense of justice. The hidden mechanism had worked exactly as designed. The local, corrupt system, once impenetrable, had been meticulously exposed. All the threads were now tied, all the pieces aligned. The invisible war was over. All that remained was judgment. The harsh glare of television lights mercilessly illuminated the stage, carving deep lines of despair into Vlad Kostin's face. The scene was eerily familiar, yet now imbued with the crushing weight of context. He sat alone at a table, not in his opulent office, but in a sterile federal hearing room, surrounded by a phalanx of grim-faced lawyers. His once impeccable suit now seemed to hang on him, a symbol of his crumbling authority. A large screen behind him, meant for presentations, currently displayed a stark, unblinking image of the Elysium logo, now subtly altered to include the federal seal, a mark of its ignominious fall. This was the public reckoning. Special Agent Marcus Thorne, no longer the composed employee in a designer suit, stood at a podium, his federal uniform crisp and authoritative. His gaze was steady, calm, yet held an undeniable gravitas. The room was packed with journalists, their cameras flashing relentlessly, capturing every agonizing nuance of Vlad's public demise. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice clear and resonant, carrying an unwavering tone of professional integrity. "My name is Special Agent Marcus Thorne, and I lead the Federal Anti-Discrimination Services Special Investigations Unit. For the past 3 months, our team has conducted a thorough and extensive investigation into Elysium Boutique and its owner, Mr. Vladislav Kostin, following numerous credible allegations of systemic discrimination and various federal law violations." A low murmur rippled through the press corps. Marcus paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle, then continued. "Today, we present the culmination of that investigation. We will demonstrate how Mr. Kostin systematically abused his position of power, leveraging racial prejudice, social bias, and a network of illicit influence to create an environment of sustained discrimination, exploitation, and injustice." With a remote click, the screen behind Vlad changed. The first image was a grainy, but undeniably clear, video snippet. It showed Vlad, his face contorted in a sneer, publicly humiliating Marcus, accusing him of lacking finesse and not fitting the brand. The words, once whispered in the hallowed halls of Elysium, now boomed through the speakers, devoid of any pretense of subtlety. Vlad flinched, his eyes darting frantically. This, Marcus stated, gesturing to the screen, was not an isolated incident. This was the culmination of a deliberate, calculated pattern of behavior. The screen then transitioned to a rapid-fire montage of evidence, snippets from Marcus's hidden recordings, capturing Vlad's demeaning jokes about diversity, his patronizing remarks to employees of color, and his coded language used to justify discriminatory practices. Then came the internal memos, blow-ups of documents bearing Vlad's signature, outlining preferred client profiles and biased performance review metrics. Financial flowcharts appeared, illustrating the illicit payments from Elysium's accounts to Councilman Harrison and other local figures, meticulously tracing the corruption that had shielded Vlad. Vlad's lawyers scrambled, attempting to interject, to object, but Marcus was relentless, his presentation a seamless, irrefutable narrative of abuse. Mr. Kostin's defense has suggested these were necessary business decisions or isolated incidents of managerial discretion, Marcus stated, his voice laced with quiet contempt. The evidence, however, paints a far different picture. It reveals a deliberate, systematic campaign of discrimination designed to maintain an exclusive, homogeneous environment at the expense of human dignity and federal law. The emotional climax hit when Marcus played audio recordings of former employees. Sophia, her voice trembling but resolute, recounted how her career was sabotaged. Thomas, his voice heavy with years of suppressed anger, detailed the wage disparities he endured. Maria, the cleaner, spoke of daily indignities. Their raw, unfiltered testimonies, previously unheard and unacknowledged, now filled the room, creating a palpable sense of outrage and despair. A few journalists wiped away tears, their pens furiously scratching notes. Vlad, slumped in his chair, tried to speak, his voice a hoarse croak. "This is a fabrication. A conspiracy," he choked, but his words were drowned out by the clicking cameras and the resolute voice of Marcus Thorne, who brought up the final, damning piece of evidence, the secret ledger. This document, recovered from Mr. Kostin's accountant, reveals a dedicated, legal defense fund, a slush fund explicitly created to handle potential discrimination lawsuits. This proves premeditation, Mr. Kostin. It proves intent. The full horror of Vlad's downfall was laid bare. His carefully constructed world, his arrogance, his belief in his own untouchability, all shattered under the relentless spotlight of federal justice, orchestrated by the very men he had so contemptuously dismissed. The prologue had indeed unfolded, now with every agonizing detail laid bare for the world to see. The final gavel blow echoed through the courtroom, a sound that reverberated not just through the hushed chamber, but through the entire, fractured world Vlad Kostin had so carefully constructed. Judge Miller, a figure known for her unwavering adherence to the law, delivered the verdict with a somber gravity. Vladislav Kostin, the court finds you guilty on all counts: systemic discrimination, violations of federal employment law, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice. A collective gasp, then a surge of murmurs, swept through the gallery. Vlad, who had maintained a facade of defiance throughout the trial, visibly deflated. His jaw sagged, his eyes, once alight with contempt, now held only a desperate, animalistic fear. The years of believing himself above the law had rendered him utterly unprepared for its impartial embrace. The sentences were swift and decisive. Vlad Kostin was condemned to a substantial prison term, his once magnificent empire now reduced to a lengthy stay in a federal correctional facility. Financial penalties were astronomical, ensuring that every ill-gotten gain and every penny withheld from his employees would be seized. The Elysium boutique, already under federal control, was permanently closed, its assets liquidated to compensate the victims of his prejudice and to fund anti-discrimination initiatives. The gilded doors were not just shut, they were sealed, a monument to a fallen tyranny. Nor was Vlad alone in his downfall. Councilman Harrison, his plea deal granting him only a marginal reprieve, was found guilty of corruption and abuse of public office. His political career was irrevocably over, replaced by a prison sentence and a public shaming that stripped away every shred of his former influence. Other local business associates, who had participated in Vlad's corrupt protection racket, faced severe fines, sanctions, and the irreparable destruction of their own reputations. Their own carefully guarded secrets were now public knowledge, their networks of influence shattered. The higher system had demonstrated that its reach extended far beyond one man, dismantling the entire infrastructure that had allowed such injustice to flourish. For the many who had suffered in silence, the verdict brought a profound, liberating sense of justice. Sophia, who had endured years of belittlement, was awarded significant compensation, an acknowledgement of the career opportunities denied her. Thomas received back pay, damages, and a public apology from the federal government, validating his skilled labor and exposing the racial pay gap he had silently endured. Maria, the cleaner, was not only compensated but offered a position with a new, ethically run luxury retail chain, her dignity fully restored. Their voices, once suppressed, had been heard, acknowledged, and validated by the full force of the law. They were not merely victims, they were now testaments to the power of truth and perseverance. As Vlad was led away in handcuffs, his once commanding presence now reduced to a shuffling figure, Marcus watched, his expression serene. There was no triumph in his eyes, no personal victory. Only a quiet, resolute satisfaction. The law, in its majestic impartiality, had been served. The powerful had fallen, and the vulnerable had been vindicated. The scale of justice, once tilted by privilege and prejudice, had been reset, demonstrating that true equality was not an ideal, but a tangible, enforceable reality. With Vlad Kostin and his corrupt network dismantled, Marcus Thorne quietly stepped back from the public glare, his mission accomplished. He was not a figure who sought accolades or the spotlight. His work was methodical, systemic, a cog in a larger, indispensable machine. He had initiated a process, and the mechanism had operated with ruthless efficiency, proving that true justice did not require a hero, but a dedicated, impartial system. He remained an agent, moving on to the next investigation, the next silent battle against injustice, an unseen force working to rebalance the scales. The impact of the Elysium case, however, resonated far beyond the courtroom. It became a landmark case, setting a powerful precedent across the luxury retail industry and beyond. In the wake of the scandal, the federal government, spurred by the extensive evidence uncovered by Marcus's unit, swiftly moved to introduce new, stringent anti-discrimination legislation. These laws targeted not just overt acts of prejudice, but also subtle, systemic biases in hiring, promotion, and customer service. Independent oversight committees were established to conduct unannounced audits of elite establishments, ensuring that the lessons learned from Elysium were not forgotten. The closure of Elysium and the prosecution of its owner sparked a broader cultural reckoning. News channels, online forums, and social media platforms buzzed with discussions about implicit bias, power dynamics, and the often invisible barriers faced by marginalized communities in exclusive spaces. Other high-end businesses, fearful of similar federal scrutiny, began proactively reviewing their own HR policies, conducting diversity training, and implementing more transparent grievance procedures. The era of unchecked arrogance and subtle prejudice, once normalized in certain elite circles, had been definitively challenged. For those who had suffered, the outcome was more than just financial compensation, it was a profound restoration of dignity. Sophia, Thomas, and Maria, once dismissed and devalued, found their stories echoing in public discourse, their experiences becoming catalysts for change. They represented a quiet revolution, proving that even in the face of immense power, the truth, when channeled through an effective system, could prevail. The final image is not of destruction but of burgeoning hope. A year later, a new boutique opens on the very same prime street where Elysium once stood. Its name, Veritas, Latin for truth, gleams subtly above its entrance. Its windows display diverse faces in its marketing, its staff reflecting a genuine commitment to inclusivity. The air inside is still refined, still luxurious, but it breathes with an undeniable sense of equity and genuine respect. The lesson of Elysium had been painfully learned, and a new dawn, brighter and more just, had undeniably arrived. The story concluded, leaving the viewer with a deep, resonant sense of catharsis and the enduring belief that even the most entrenched systems of injustice can be dismantled, one meticulously planned move at a time, by those brave enough to activate the higher power of impartial justice.